هلا والله ويا هلا. فلسطيني اسمي كافي والكوفي فوق كتافي، اسمي كافي والكوفي فوق كتافي، والكل من طلعت عشفافي توقف الدنيا أكملها. هلا والله ويا هلا، هلا والله ويا هلا، الأصل والمرجانة. هل فلسطين المهيوب من في الدنيا بيجهانا؟ هلا والله ويا هلا.
مرحبا جميعا. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're going to have this discussion today with the Clubhouse representatives. But first of all, I would like to thank Palestine Digital Activism Forum and colleagues in Hamle for organizing this amazing event. My name is Dima Samaro, and I am the Middle East and North Africa Regional Researcher and Representative at the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. And I'll be moderating this discussion today with Amro Mitwalli. I hope Amro is here. Okay,
I'm here.
Perfect. Awesome. Hi, Amro. It's great to have you with us in this discussion. So just to say a few words about the purpose of this session, we hope that during this discussion, human rights activists and human rights defenders in Palestine and across the Middle East and North Africa region would have a better understanding of how they can use Clubhouse and as a digital innovative tool to organize and mobilize themselves, as well as to promote their human rights work on the platform and hopefully also reclaim their human rights work and rights as well. So we have with us a very distinguished speaker from Clubhouse, Amro Mitwalli. So just to introduce you briefly, Amro. Amro is the head of international policy at Clubhouse. He was also previously a policy and enforcement manager at YouTube, overseeing political extremism and graphic violence. Amro also is a Fulbright scholar, and he's currently a Juris Doctor candidate at Harvard Law School, and his writings have appeared in the Harvard Human Rights Journal, the Yale Journal of Law and Technology, the Georgetown Journal of National Security Law, and the Slate magazine. So welcome, Amro. It's so great to have you with us here, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dima. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Hamle and everyone who was part of the preparatory committee for the Palestine Digital Activism Forum. We are really excited to be here today to talk about Clubhouse.
Awesome. Thank you, Amro. I know we were supposed to be joined by Jess Manson, who's also your colleague, but I understand that she may have personal circumstances, and will not be able to join us. But I hope that we can cover as much as questions as we can with you today.
Yes, and unfortunately, as you mentioned, Dima, Jessica was unable to make it, but she sends along her regrets, and you're in good hands. I know Jessica is a force to be reckoned with, so I'll do my best to represent Clubhouse.
Sounds good. Okay, so I think we can kick off now. But before, I just wanted to encourage everyone and everyone joining us in this session. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. And we will have also a short Q&A session towards the end of the workshop. So please make sure to, again, drop them. If you have any questions, Amru, any follow-up questions, we would be happy to get to them and answer them, hopefully. Okay, so I think we can start maybe, Amru, by, I think as a starting point, when we speak about how human rights defenders use social media platforms, especially since 2011, during the 2011 uprisings, where these social media platforms were used to push for political reform, social justice, and how users actually transformed these platforms into tools for organizing, as well as to advance their cause for justice and freedom. But also considering the ongoing crackdown on human rights activists in the region, as well as the shrinking of civic space and the rise in digital authoritarianism. I think what I'm really interested to hear more about from you is, given this repression of online movements, what steps Clubhouse has taken or is considering to take to adapt to the local and regional context of our region, or how you even, when you build your tools, to what extent do you also consider working with the human rights defenders and activists, or building those tools with them in mind? So I think that would be the first question for you.
It's a good question. So I guess I just want to start first by giving a little bit of context about where Clubhouse has been in the last 2 years, because although we've grown a lot, I think some may not know that Clubhouse is only 2 years old. We started off in March 2020, so during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, and since then the app has, we've been in a really grateful position where we have, it just exploded in terms of popularity and demand. And one of the things, as we saw a lot of this growth, was, really starting to think about the novelty of what it is that Clubhouse was introducing in terms of online speech and social media, specifically the use of live audio. And so Clubhouse originally began as an invite-only system. And that was done because the founders of Clubhouse, Paul and Rohan, really wanted the app to be grown in a way that was scalable. And so, what we mean is that the servers don't crash, and we are able to release features gradually and get feedback from users. But even despite that, we saw so much growth. And in the summer of 2021, we switched from an invite-only system to a general release. So anyone could download the app and make an account and use the app for whatever purpose that they want. But the thing about Clubhouse, as I mentioned, is that it's a live audio app. And now we have certain features. For example, you can chat in rooms, but the heart of it is the power of voice. And, we've seen there's so many incredible examples of how Clubhouse has been used. And, in particular to the question that you said, the thing that we've seen a lot of is people really trying to make rooms to connect during moments of crisis and sort of breaking news moments all over the world. And, there was a moment in the last summer, when I would say that the world was sort of watching everything that was taking place, we're talking about from May through the end of August and onward. But in particular, we were talking about what was happening, or we were looking at what was happening in Afghanistan with the fall of the capital. And there was a moment when a group of us had basically implemented a number of changes. And so I want to start here because I think it shows like an evolving approach for Clubhouse in terms of how we respond to the needs of communities around the world, and how specifically we're thinking about human rights defenders. But specifically in the days leading up to the fall of the capital in Afghanistan, we introduced basically a push notification. So every user that had Clubhouse installed and were not active within the last few days, again, right around the fall of the Capitol, were given a push notification and basically given a chance to change their profile name. We locked down their accounts. We made it difficult for the accounts to be discovered in search. And we sort of, gave everyone the chance to, basically get a second start in terms of how they wanted to represent themselves on Clubhouse. And we did that because we knew that obviously the situation was evolving. We had, at that point as well, grown significantly in terms of the number of people working on policy and trust and safety and content moderation. For example, when I first started working with Clubhouse in June of last year, the team was still so small. And so towards the end of the summer, even the capacity over those 4 months had grown immensely. And we sort of were able to think more strategically about how to respond to breaking news events. And then the second thing that I'll just say is that, kind of building off of that, in February, obviously we all saw the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine, and we were working on and then sort of decided to expedite the work on the release of something called protected profiles. And that's something where, any user can go into Clubhouse and go into their settings and enable this feature. But it, again, basically, it sort of makes it so that you have to approve the people who are trying to follow you. And it gives you a little bit more control over how you interact with people or how people try and interact with you. And that was something that we released. Again, we sort of expedited the work on it and released as part of the just unfolding situation in Ukraine. So those are two things that just come to mind immediately about some of our work. And we can obviously get into more details, but that's what comes to mind.
That's really great to hear. It's really important to learn that also Clubhouse is taking into consideration what's happening on the ground, how you can also contribute, to creating a safe platform for human rights defenders during these critical times. I think my follow-up question to that, Amru, would be, I know that, for example, with the real name policy that you have on the website, that people have to use their real name, first name and last name. But I was wondering if you are thinking maybe of changing this policy, because people eventually need sometimes to write or speak under pseudonyms, because given again the context that we live in. So I was wondering if you also, in Clubhouse is considering to change this policy, at least also to protect human rights defenders speaking in rooms about certain issues or taboos topics, for example.
Yes, thank you, Dima. So as you mentioned, for those who may not know, Clubhouse does have a real name policy. Users are required, or we ask users to provide their first and last name when they're making their account on the app. You might be wondering why we have this policy to begin with. And I think this comes back to what Clubhouse is trying to do. And one of our missions is to try and make a more human place on the internet. And we believe that connection, comes with identity and being able to, see the person through their profile picture or through their name in terms of who you're trying to talk to. At the same time, we do know that not everyone can use their real name, or there might be situations where people may not want to use their real name. So in the context of human rights defenders and activists, there might be legitimate security concerns to use their name. And so that's actually one situation where we do allow an exception to the rule. So people can use a pseudonym if it's safer, or they just feel more comfortable to do so. And we also actually have an exception to our real name policy for artistic purposes. So there's some artists on the app, as I'm sure many of you know, there are artists all over the world that perform under a different name. And so for artistic purposes as well, we allow people to provide a different name than their own. But we don't have a plan in place right now to change our real name policy. The other thing I will say, though, is that one of the things that we made sure to do when we, in response last summer, when we were thinking about how to restrict and protect some of the user profiles in Afghanistan, was that we consulted with several freedom of expression and human rights experts to think about how we could better communicate the fact that users have a chance to change their name, when we gave all users in country basically a reset on their profile. And that was something that we also worked with Witness when we were rolling out our protected profiles and some of our work in response to the situation in Ukraine. We worked with them as well to get some feedback and thinking about how do we, again, communicate the fact that people can use a pseudonym for human rights and safety purposes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Samro. I'm glad to also hear about these efforts. I think, again, it's really important to think of what really, I think, because maybe it's different from a context to another. So sometimes, even when it comes to the MENA region, I think maybe these protective policies or restrictions on some profiles, for example, would be very helpful and useful to those who are doing human rights work on the ground. So it's really great to hear about these efforts. And I think my other question, Amru, is, well, I mean, it's related also to content moderation. Because I think sometimes when it comes to how social media companies, and in this case, Clubhouse, when you see different rooms happening on the app, but sometimes I think that context would be really important to consider, so you can understand what are these people speaking about in this room. Are they spreading disinformation, for example, or fake news, etc., or are they inciting to violence? I think it would be great if you could, share with us a time when Clubhouse maybe made a mistake in enforcement of certain policies, and if you can tell us also what did you take in response to these, to the mistakes that you did. How do you handle it, or how do you handle these different cases happening on the platform?
Yeah. So actually, the example that comes to mind right now is actually from the May uprising last year. So there was a room on Clubhouse where the title of the room was either, I can't remember the exact word. It was either kill Arab or death to Arab. And that was the title. And a moderator thought, in reviewing the title, that this was incitement against Palestinians, against the Arab community, and so they removed the room. The room was shut down. And then we found on appeal that what was actually happening was the room was created by Palestinians, sort of responding to and using a sort of a chant that was used against them during the May uprising. And it was, there's a number of reasons we could think of why someone used that chant or that phrase as the title of the room. It obviously, people were hearing it, and it was, very apparent in terms of some of the violence that was aimed at the Palestinian community. It's also, for better or for worse, it captures attention. But the titles in a room in Clubhouse, there's only so many characters, there's only so much space. And so when it's sort of stripped of context, and that's all a content moderator has to make a decision, they lean towards this would be an instance of incitement and then shut down the room. And we found on appeal that it was actually, it was a room that was created by Palestinians and activists sort of trying to communicate what was happening on the ground. And in particular, communicate it towards the English-speaking and Western world. And so when we found that, we ended up reinstating the room and removing any penalties that were issued on the user accounts. And so that's one instance where, I think we learned just how critical it is in general to have the right context, but I think in particular to make sure that we are getting as much information, not just from a room title, but sort of holistically in terms of what we're finding on user profiles and the contents of a conversation as they're unfolding.
Thank you, Amro. I have a follow-up question to this. I was wondering if you actually have an appeal mechanism in place for users who can escalate such cases or incidents when they face similar situations, because I think this is also part of how you can get familiar with what's happening on the platform for regions such as the Arab region, and I think it's important also for users to understand how they can take this up to you when they face similar incident.
Yes. So before we even get to appeals, just in terms of, I'd love to take a couple minutes just to talk about the reporting mechanism or flagging content. So in Clubhouse, you have the ability to flag for our content review teams on a number of different surfaces, so to speak. So when you're opening the app, you can report a room, you can report a user, and we sort of give several different options to try and flag what exactly is the problem. And generally we don't, if a room happens and there's no flag corresponding to the room, we delete all of the audio. We don't save audio. The only instance where we might do so is when a room has a flag on it. And if that's the case, we'll just preserve the sort of portion of audio where the flag or when the flag had come in, just so that our agents can review the excerpt and make a decision as to whether something was said that violates our policies. If there's a situation, we have content moderators staffed across policy areas, from harassment to hate speech to violence and violent extremism to child safety and so on. There's at this point, we've sort of worked very quickly to build a robust content moderation team, but also just robust policies. In something that I think, despite the fact that we're a small company, we've just entering the social media space where there's been a lot of attention and scrutiny, rightfully so, on companies. We've sort of had to move very quickly in a way that larger platforms maybe didn't have to move with the same speed when they were first beginning. That being said, so when a penalty is issued to a user, it can range from a variety of different suspensions. So it could be a 2-day suspension, it could be a week-long suspension, or if it's truly severe, we would issue an indefinite suspension to the user. In all situations when a suspension is communicated to the user, we do provide information on how to submit a request to our support team by email for appeals. And it's something that, as we're continuing to evolve in terms of the features we're offering, in terms of just the user base and entering new markets, we are, spending a lot of time now really thinking about our appeals mechanism and thinking about how to make sure that it's working to the, at the best level that it can be. But we know that there's always a lot of work to do in the content moderation space across the industry. And so we do have the option to submit appeals, but it's something we are actually actively discussing amongst our team in terms of starting to rethink how the appeals process works.
That's great to hear. I think just when it comes to the issue of reporting and flagging, Amro, So there is, let's say, a sort of trend that we have seen across different social media platforms, especially when it comes to reporting. So sometimes if, there is let's say someone doing critical human rights work, or someone from the opposition parties, etc., or dissents in the region, we see that there is sort of a targeted reporting campaigns against them so that they close their content, and it would be sort of a censorship. So it's a flagging in bulk, I would say. So I think, how do you deal with this issue when if it's being reported by many users? But I think, again, there is the issue of the context here that you might be missing. And I'm just wondering also if you have like enough content moderators, especially for the Arabic language, and how you deal with this, or how do you plan to improve sort of your operations when it comes to this issue with the Arabic language more specifically?
Absolutely. So let me start with the question of bulk flagging. So in terms of sort of how our tools and our processes work, we, in instances where, let's say there's an active room and there's someone who's getting a lot of flags based on something that they're saying, because as you said, maybe there are people that are trying to flag in bulk about something that's happening. In that case, the way that our system works is that it wouldn't, it still is ultimately one incident that would be sent for an agent for review. And the agent isn't really looking or taking into consideration the number of flags. There's very specific things that we look for when we're trying to make a determination if a violation has taken place. We're looking to see, and again, if the flag happened during a live room, we're looking to see if the room, if the audio has a violation. We're also looking at things like, is there something in their bio, in their profile picture, in the title of the room, in the club that's hosting the room, that might suggest that there's a violation that is taking place. But in terms of the actual number of flags, that really isn't a determination of ours that we look at when we're seeing if there's something that's taking place. And that's something I know that many people online often face when they're dealing with perhaps controversial or sensitive topics. Sometimes having to face a situation where there's bulk flagging or attempts to try and intimidate or silence users in that way. In regards to the second question about moderation in Arabic, so we have content moderators working 24/7, staffed across a number of languages, including Arabic. And one of the things is that Clubhouse is we know Clubhouse is popular in the Middle East, in North Africa, in the Arab world, and so we are we want to respond to markets that we're operating in, markets that we're popular in, and so we make sure that we have content moderators who can speak the language. And one of the things as well I would say is that in other social media companies that use perhaps automated detection, so for example, Facebook or YouTube, is that audio as a medium is still quite new in terms of social media. And the reality is that technology as a whole is so underdeveloped in this space in terms of capturing real-time audio, trying to transcribe it appropriately. And so we rely on many other signals and don't rely as heavily on automated detection because of just where audio is as a whole. And so, that's something where we've seen plenty of instances where automated technology is just failing when it comes to languages outside of English, or perhaps languages outside of English and other languages spoken in Western Europe. And this is maybe I would say, an advantage, just given how Clubhouse operates. But in terms of the heart of your question, yes, we do have content moderators, native speakers in Arabic, and if not native, then they speak it, fluently as a second language. And we do that because, we know that it's just critical to not only have people who are comfortable understanding the language, but also are able to really understand the political, and cultural nuances that accompany any language in the world.
That sounds really great. And yeah, I think this is one of because again, Clubhouse use audio. I think this was one of the things why it was very popular and still, but people want to really understand, it's a new tool maybe to them, different from the automated decision, again, that other social media turn to. So I think this, again, important discussion. So, as activists, we can understand how we can use this in our advantage as well. I'm sorry for any noises. My neighbors are doing some maintenance work, so please ignore the noises. Okay, so Amro, I think this actually brings me to another question I wanted to ask about how do you communicate to your users and to the public about the steps that you are taking, in respect for human rights, for example. What efforts are you taking to be more transparent in your operations? And more specifically, I would like to focus here on the compliance requests that you might be getting from governments. So I think it would be great if you can tell us more about transparency reports that you have published, or how you envision to engage in this in the future, more likely to be more transparent again.
Yes, so we believe, in terms of, I think, how we approach our content policies, how we approach our content moderation, is we want to be clear, we want to be communicative, and we want to be transparent, for our users. So you can go to community.clubhouse.com to see our policies. And additionally, we just published several months ago our very first transparency report that covers 2021. And, we were really excited to roll this out. Obviously, because again, as just a company that's still in its early stages, we knew that it was important to find a good balance, I think, between the growth that we've been experiencing, but also making sure that we're trying to communicate to our users and to the world about the work that we're doing in terms of content moderation and enforcement. You mentioned sort of requests from law enforcement and from governments. One of the things as well that we've done a lot of thinking around is how do we make sure that, again, we find a balance between, in some instances, having to comply with local laws or takedown requests, as well as obviously just the need to protect freedom of expression online, and particularly on Clubhouse. And one of the ways that we do that is that, we really do spend a lot of time reviewing every request that comes in. We're not in the business of sort of just accepting a request and removing content, or, complying with requests for information just because it's submitted. We have a team in place that reviews each request, and really spends a lot of time assessing what the basis of the removal request is, and if there truly is a violation on the app. And we also take into consideration, we insist that everything comes in through written communication, through our legal removal request form online. And we have a number of, steps in place, again, to try and make sure that we are trying to be as respectful towards user rights as possible. And for the requests that come in, you can see this in our first transparency report as well. We do break down not only by country how many requests we've received, but also the request type by country. So for example, was it a request for preserving user information? Was it a request for removal of content, and so on? So that's something, again, for a company of our size, we have several people that work on sort of corresponding and responding to law enforcement and government agency requests. And something we made sure that in our very first version of our transparency report to include. And we're excited to keep sort of iterating and changing our transparency report as we start to think about how do we want to capture all of the work that we've done in just the 5 months of 2022, let alone the rest of this year as well. So it's something where it's available on our sort of help center page, and something that we're excited to hear from people and hear feedback as to what else they might want to see in future versions of the report.
That's amazing, and congratulations again on releasing your first transparency report. I think, Amru, when it comes also to the transparency reports, it's an ongoing debate that we are having now. Several human rights organizations and digital rights experts are also speaking about why it's important to have these requests, for example, from governments, and to allow others, to have access to these information, especially not only because of the context, but also how we can use it as a civil society organizations in our work to push back against government abuse. So I think that's why it's really good to see, that Clubhouse is doing this effort, and it's again something that we as civil society organizations can also use that in our work and inform our work as well, to understand the different practices and behaviors by governments, what trends might happen when they request certain, if they request access to users' data, for example. And I think when it comes to this specific issue, I was wondering, in terms of, for anyone in you who would like to join Clubhouse nowadays, you have to register your own phone number. So I think that might be the concern, raised by different human rights organizations about if the number have to be registered. So what about if you get requests, for example, at later stages? So what do you do with this? Because it's I think when it comes to the phone number, at least in our region, so this number, you have to register your ID with it, and then your passport, for example. So there is, many information and personal data at stake when you provide your phone number. So I was wondering if you could also tell us more about this, maybe the use of or register using your phone number specifically, and how you may change this in the future.
Yeah, so we do require when you're creating your account on Clubhouse, we do ask for your phone number. This being said, it's something that we obviously treat with the utmost care in terms of how the information is being handled and stored, and we use it primarily because just part of the sign up flow is that, and this is something that users can opt out of. But we sort of want to make a good experience for people in terms of finding community as quickly as possible. And so when you're signing up, one of the things that you can opt in for is to connect with your contacts list and find friends who are also using the Clubhouse app. This is something that people, again, can opt out of, but that's one of the reasons why we ask users to provide their phone number. And then, you mentioned a little bit about requests for information, and it just depends. I mean, each request differs in terms of the information and the sort of urgency that come in. But generally speaking, requests for user information are, they're asking for other signals in terms of like what they need for, let's say, something that's urgent or quickly unfolding. But again, even in those situations, we we demand or we ask that the request is in writing, it's submitted through our legal removals channel or our reporting flow. And we still review each request to make sure that it's valid, it's legitimate, and that it has proper information for us. Because again, we're not in the business of responding to any request from any agency just because they say that this is urgent. We ask, we say, please give us more information. This is really unclear based on what's provided, as to where exactly you think that there's a violation, or if a request comes in that's too broad, we'll say this is too broad and you need to narrow it before we'll consider complying with the request. And so it's something that in regards to the phone number, part of the reason why we ask for the phone number is that it's just a better experience, and I think a really good way to connect with people quickly when you're first getting onto Clubhouse. But in regards to whether there's plans to change that feature, not to my knowledge at this time.
Great. Thanks, Amro. I think it's also, really interesting because I think it's great, really, that you are also here with us, that we are learning more about, what's happening with Clubhouse, how it's even doing some sort of impact assessment for, the different requests that you get. And I think it's, it's something that we also hope to see, and hopefully other companies also at least trying to adopt the human rights policies in their operations, and how they also how they actually do this in their operations, how that could be, how they can translate it, basically. So I think it's definitely, an important thing that you mentioned. I think, Amru, for next question, maybe it's more for us to hear, what have you seen, how have you seen users in the Middle East and North Africa region using the platform? We know, for example, from a personal experience, when we first used the app, I think it's great. We start having conversation, but at some point, if the discussion, again, is very taboo, for example, we would see sometimes some bots or fake accounts popping up and starting, to disrupt the conversation. So I think, what sort of behaviors or how you have seen people using platform in, Clubhouse in general? Hopefully it's all positive, but I mean, we are, I think, interested also to hear more about the different use by the users in the region.
So we've seen Clubhouse be used in so many different ways. I think one of the things that I've really appreciated, even as someone who has used the app. So I'm saying this both as someone who works at Clubhouse, but also as someone who uses the app, that I've really loved is that, for example, it's been a really great way for me to stay very, plugged in and connected to current discussions and debates happening with the Egyptian community, both in Egypt and in diaspora, and been great to do this both in Arabic and in English. Similarly, I also use the app to try and follow what's happening with discussions and debates in Turkey and with the Turkish community. And so, this is something where I think the transnational component is just really wonderful. And I think what's really exciting is that you're able to, and you see this on Clubhouse, sort of build transnational solidarity and education efforts. And you see this both, for example, in Arabic to connect Arabic speakers, again, in the Arab world and in diaspora. And you also see this in English as like a very intentional attempt to connect non-Arabic speakers with, with our community. And so it's a really great way, I think, very quickly to think about what type of transnational organizing you're trying to do and in what language, because obviously the language you're using will really dictate who's going to be able to participate and, what the desired outcome is. We see a lot of activity on Clubhouse where people, specifically on this point, doing a lot of organizing and solidarity building for the Palestinian cause. We see this in Arabic and we see this in English as well. And so, I've seen rooms before where you have people from Palestine to Egypt to Tunisia, all in discussion with each other, talking about, how can people build better connections and build solidarity for the cause. Additionally, you also see things I've also seen rooms in English where, again, it's trying to connect people who maybe don't know as much about the issue, and trying to educate people in that way. And so I think, again, it's showing the versatility of the app. One of the other things I just wanted to say as well on that front is that I think what makes Clubhouse really exciting is that while we do a lot of work to make sure that we have, fair policies and a good detection system and content moderators all over the world, we also want to make sure that users, and in particular moderators, or the people that are sort of running a conversation, have their own autonomy and are empowered as well. And so one of the things that I think is really unique is that, again, we have our rules for the app, broadly speaking, but also moderators can set rules for their own clubs and rooms. So, as long as those rules don't violate our policies, moderators can say that if you're, trying to talk about X thing, we'll ask you to leave. Or, so one of the things that we know is that people are connecting through audio for a variety of reasons. And it's really important to make sure that, because this is a live sort of connection that's unfolding, that we need to make sure that the people who are actually running the conversation or trying to steer the dialogue are able to do so themselves. And obviously that they know that if problems are unfolding, that there's a flagging and reporting mechanism in place so that our team can intervene appropriately. But we give moderators a lot of control in terms of removing users from a room, trying to set the norms and the rules and the expectations for a conversation. And we do that because, again, we know that this is live audio. And I think part of the community that we're building on Clubhouse relies not only on us, but on all of you as users. And so we're kind of all in this together. To the point you raised about sort of spam behavior, I mean, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we improve our systems to detect perhaps spammy accounts or spammy behavior. And it's something we don't tolerate on the app. And so there's, we rely on a number of signals, both in terms of automated signals and then also flags from users to quickly review and remove accounts that, might be in violation of some of our policies on that front. But generally, I think we've seen really like a wealth of content from MENA in terms of how people are using the app, and we see it again for we see it in terms of political mobilization, we see it in terms of educational efforts, and I think what's particularly exciting for me is just the transnational component. I think is very strong, and just really promising to see.
That's brilliant. I'm also glad that you are trying to detect these accounts that sometimes doing spamming behavior. Sorry, excuse me. And I think this is also linked to our questions. I think you may have answered some, but it's related to a question. how do you empower speakers environment when they join Clubhouse? You mentioned that moderators have also to take control of the room, but if there is any specific features that you also maybe missed or didn't mention at the beginning, something that users should be aware of and know so they can control the room and hopefully stop such spamming behaviors from entering the room.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we spend a lot of time thinking about and making sure that we have good tools in place for moderators to think about the type of experience that they're trying to offer people. And so, for example, if someone is being disruptive in a way that's sort of counterproductive for a conversation, moderators are empowered to remove the user from the room. They're also able to, I think one of the things as well about live audio is that so much of the moderation, so to speak, is also happening between users in real time, right? You and me as users in a room are able to sort of, or let's say we're both speakers in a room, we can, kind of, again, in real time, ask each other to change our behavior, change how we're communicating with one another, sort of be warned to stop if we're maybe speaking in a way that's dismissive or rude. And moderators are able to, take that ultimate step to remove a user from a room. Similarly, they're able to think about who's allowed to join the stage to speak and who's not allowed to, if someone is sort of abusing that privilege. And, a lot of this, again, just comes down to the experience in each room. I think the excitement of each room is that you don't ever fully know what you're going to get because it all depends on who's in the room at that time, right? And how the conversation unfolds. And the chemistry of the people in the room will change depending on who's participating. But again, that dynamism, while we think it's wonderful, in some instances can be, there's a degree of unpredictability in terms of how something might unfold. And so in that case, and for that reason, we spend a lot of time really thinking about how moderators can try and steer healthier discussions and dialogue. Additionally, users obviously have the ability to block other users. They can report. And I'll say on the moderator front is that we do have a number of resources on our website for moderators and sort of tips for we have tips and resources for moderators on our website in terms of helping them kind of think about how they can use the app in healthy ways. Or steer conversation in healthy ways. And so we see all of this as, again, we have our own rules and our own policies, but it's just as important that we have the right tools, educational resources, and assistance to empower users and moderators to also kind of contribute to the community that they want to see and be a part of on Clubhouse.
That's amazing. And yeah, I have to say, I love the experience because it's something new again. I think, Kamru, maybe when it comes to this issue, one of the, when we speak always about potential concerns that may come up, especially that, again, this is an innovative app, using audio rather than just, texting or typing. So one of the issues, I think, when it comes to what if someone recorded what I was saying in this room, even though, you mentioned that Clubhouse doesn't restore, all the audio of certain rooms, especially if not flagged. So I was wondering, when it comes to these other complicated issues that may come up, what do you think if others recorded me while, I'm using this app because I know it's different, because I think it could be more of a safe space for us, we can control it. But what if someone recorded this discussion, for example, from their phone?
Yeah, so, one thing I'll say is, on this point, so we do have a feature on Clubhouse called replays. And this allows the creator of a room to record the conversation. One thing I'll say is that users have the option to turn replay on and off. I mentioned protected profiles earlier during our conversation. Protected profiles disables replays by default, and then you can turn them on if you wish. And so that's something where, we actually see the ability for, again, when it's properly communicated and people are sort of consenting to this, replays can be a very powerful tool. So we talked a little bit about, let's use it for transnational organizing as an example, right? I think so much of organizing what's important to organizing is not just the sort of real-time face-to-face communication, but also I think like the dissemination of information after a conversation has taken place. And replays can be a really important way to make sure that people who weren't able to join a conversation have the right information. But to use some of our work around responding to users in Ukraine as an example, we do remind people that just because you can, use a pseudonym for human rights purposes and you can disable replays, that there's some degree where it requires users to be mindful also about just the information that they themselves are sharing. I can use a different name. I can have a profile picture that doesn't show my face, but I might accidentally say something that maybe discloses where I am, or I mentioned something about, a cafe on a street that I live on, and then it becomes easier to figure out where my location might be. And some of that is, we remind users that while we have a number of measures and features in place to try and be very privacy protecting, by design, there's a degree of control that I think users themselves need to be mindful of, that they need to think about, how much information they're comfortable disclosing about themselves in a room. Just because there's that element of privacy where it really is just up to each user in thinking about what they're comfortable sharing to the other speakers and to all of the users that might be listening in on the room.
Yeah, I think that should be, another session about why privacy matters and why we shouldn't share much information, through these apps. But I think, this is why maybe people were looking to Clubhouse, as a tool they can use. Maybe by speaking, they see it as a way they can communicate more with others. And I think when it comes to solidarity, I have seen many people using Clubhouse. I mean, you may have a better idea of, the rise maybe or the number of users from the region using it. But I think it's great, at least, that you also set reminders, for example, about, don't share much information, for example, about this, or I think with the new policies that you are introducing. And to this point, Amru, I was wondering, when you formulate your policies at Clubhouse, do you do this in consultation with human rights activists, human rights organizations, different stakeholders? I'm just curious about, to what extent you involve other stakeholders so you can, again, embed a human rights language, let's say, in a way so that we can ensure, human rights is respected in your operations.
Absolutely. Yes, we do. And it's something that, I think, again, in the last year and a half of our policy and our trust and safety work, so much of it has been about just sort of getting to a point where we have good policies in place, good tools in place. We have a content moderation team in place. And, we've sort of sprinted for the last year and a half to get all of this, started. But now that we've sort of hit that point, we're in a position where we're able to take a breath and really think about how do we grow to the next level. And, while we're happy that we've done engagement with outside experts, with civil society groups, with human rights experts, to date, we know that we want to do a lot more. And so we're, actually spending a lot of time last month and this month really developing like a robust engagement strategy to make sure that we're getting the right perspectives from all over the world, to make sure that the policies we're developing are sort of respectful of regional trends, regional concerns, and regional nuance. And so it's something that, yes, we have done, and we're actually really working actively to really build out this part of our work.
That's great. I'm glad that you are also involving other organizations, and I encourage anyone who's participating here with us today, if you also see something on the platform you would like to flag it. As Amro mentioned, there is a specific mechanism that you can use, but also you can communicate with them. I hope I'm not putting extra work on you, Amro.
No, not at all, not at all. And yeah, by the way, just thank you again, Dima. I really appreciate you sort of moderating our conversation.
Absolutely.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And since, we are getting towards the end of the workshop, I'd like to give you the floor if you would like to say anything maybe you missed, or if you would like, like a final reminder or something for people who are watching us, how they can use the platform for solidarity and organizing and mobilizing.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll just say very quickly is just ending on a note of, I think what makes Clubhouse just really beautiful, I think as a space, is that it really is about trying to connect people through the power of voice and the power of each of our voices. And so it's been really exciting to see all of the ways that Clubhouse has been used for political mobilization and for education. And so I just want to encourage everyone to keep using, I think, one of the most powerful tools that we all have, which is our voices, and to keep expressing yourselves. So I just want to end on that note. And thank you all again.
That's a very powerful ending. Thank you so much, Amro. I myself had learned so much from this session, and I hope the rest of participants also learned from this. I don't see any questions, so I hope we answered pretty much many of the questions that they have in mind. And yeah, thank you again. And it would be great again to see this work, flourish more, and hopefully we can continue advancing human rights.
We're looking forward to it.
Awesome.